I sent the message without thinking. My hands were shaking, my breathing was fast, and my heart was hammering in my chest as if it was trying to warn me that something terrible was about to happen. I know everything about you. 3 seconds later, 2 notifications appeared on the screen. He read it. She too. The silence was immediate. No response, no attempt to disguise it, no lame excuse. Just a suffocating emptiness, a silent confession that didn't need words. At the exact moment those words reached their cell phones, I knew my life would never be the same. I took a deep breath, trying to control the avalanche of emotions that overwhelmed me. Anger, disgust, pain. It was a mix of feelings so intense that it almost made me dizzy. My mind was traveling a mile a minute, reconstructing every detail that I had ignored until that moment. All the signs were there, screaming in my face, and I, foolish, blind, chose not to see. The late meetings, the hastily disconnected calls, the forced smiles when I got close. I had convinced myself it was paranoia, insecurity, an unfounded fear of losing what I loved most. But the truth always finds a way to emerge, and now it was coming at me like a dagger straight to the chest. Standing in the room, I tried to imagine the scene on the other side. She and him, in his house, the place where I knew she was at that moment. A dinner? An innocent conversation? No, I couldn't fool myself anymore. They were together, exchanging knowing glances, perhaps laughing at me, while I sat at home, like an idiot, believing everything was fine. But now they were no longer laughing. Now they were desperate. They knew that I knew. Panic must have taken over them, scared looks, cell phones shaking in their hands, minds working too fast to find a way out. But there was no way out. Their game was over. I picked up my cell phone and stared at the screen, waiting, begging for an answer. Some attempt to lie, to manipulate, to turn the tables on me. But the silence was absolute. This was worse. That meant there were no more excuses, no more room for pretense. It was real. And that was the part that hurt the most. The fact that, at that exact moment, she was already devising a way to minimize the damage, to convince me to believe something that wasn't true. That was what disgusted me most. Not the betrayal itself, but the lack of any trace of remorse. Because if there had been guilt, if there had been an ounce of regret, she would have responded. He would have run home, fallen to his knees in front of me and begged for forgiveness. But she didn't do that. No. She was still there. With him. My blood boiled, my hands clenched into fists, and I felt a bitter taste in my mouth. Betrayal wasn't just an act, it was a poison that spread quickly, contaminating everything around. The love, the trust, the memories. Everything dissolving, falling apart before my eyes. And the worst part? I still loved her. My stupid heart still wanted to believe that it wasn't true, that there was an explanation, that everything could be fixed. But my mind knew the truth. And the truth was cruel. My phone vibrated. A name on the screen. My breath caught in my throat. Could it be her? What would she say? How would you try to patch up something that was already in pieces? I answered, feeling a sharp chill run down my spine. But it wasn't her. It was someone who shouldn't have been calling me at that time. Someone who, without knowing it, was about to make the whole situation even worse. Someone who, for a second, made my world collapse in a way I could never have predicted. And that's when I realized. The message I sent destroyed more than just a case of cheating. She opened a door to something much bigger. Something I could never have predicted. Something that would change everything. Now, I needed to decide. What would I do next? How would you deal with that? How would you face not only the pain of betrayal, but the brutal truth that was yet to come? I thought I knew everything. But the truth is, I didn't know anything. Not yet. Welcome to the channel. Here, betrayal is never romanticized or justified. The stories you will hear are fictional, but the pain and consequences are real. Our goal is to show how betrayal destroys lives, erodes trust and leaves deep scars. Every choice has a price, and in this story, you'll see how everything can fall apart in an instant. Brace yourself, because what comes next is shocking. Good story. James always believed he had his life under control. He was not an impulsive man, never had been. His routine was meticulously planned, his career was built on years of dedication, and his family always came first. Married to Sophie for almost a decade, he was proud of the solid relationship they had built. From the first day he met her, he knew she was the woman he wanted to share his life with. Sophie was radiant, full of energy, the kind of person who lit up a room with just her presence. Always kind, always understanding, a dedicated wife and a professional admired by everyone around her. Working in the administrative sector of a large company, she was respected by her boss, her colleagues, and her subordinates. James never had any reason to suspect anything. Their marriage was a reflection of the partnership they had from the beginning, an unshakable connection built on trust and companionship. The home they had created together was a refuge. A spacious house in a quiet neighborhood, with a well-kept garden where they spent Sunday mornings having coffee together. He always liked watching her in these moments, her hair tousled by the wind, the cup between her delicate fingers, her eyes lost on the horizon as they talked about everyday trivialities. James liked this simplicity, this stability, the feeling of belonging. He believed that true love was made up of these small moments, not grand gestures or overwhelming passions. I always knew that Sophie was more outgoing than him, that she liked to go out and socialize, while he preferred the calm of home. But that was never a problem. Sophie understood him, respected his reserved way of being, and he made a point of supporting her in everything, even if that meant nights when she went out to company events, formal dinners, long meetings. He trusted her. I trusted blindly. However, something has started to change in recent months. Small details that went unnoticed at first, but that, over time, began to form a pattern. The calls that were once casual now seemed calculated, the messages she sent during the day became scarce. She was still affectionate, but something about the way she looked at him seemed different. As if he were present, but at the same time distant, with his thoughts elsewhere. James didn't want to make a big deal out of it. Maybe it was just stress from work, accumulated tiredness, or even something temporary. But deep down, an uncomfortable feeling was beginning to grow. Something was out of place. The changes were subtle, but they could not be ignored. Sophie has always had a very well-established routine, predictable schedules, organized appointments. But, lately, that had been changing. Her cell phone was always nearby, face down on the table, with notifications muted. Dinners that were previously planned were now cancelled at the last minute, always with some excuse that there were unexpected meetings or urgent deadlines to meet. The nights when she returned later became frequent. When he asked about work, she smiled, responded vaguely, and quickly changed the subject. James tried to ignore it. He tried to convince himself that he was imagining things, that his mind was creating meaningless paranoia. But the doubt was there, growing every day. The instinct that something was wrong became impossible to ignore. He began to observe her more closely, noticing gestures and words that would previously have gone unnoticed. He noticed that Sophie avoided eye contact when talking about certain topics. That her laugh on the phone seemed more lively than when she talked to him. That sometimes, when he entered the room, she hurriedly blocked her cell phone, as if she had something to hide. He didn't want to be that kind of man. He didn't want to invade her privacy, he didn't want to suspect her without proof, he didn't want to be dominated by irrational jealousy. But the truth was that trust, the one he had always had as the unshakable foundation of their relationship, was beginning to crack. He began to feel restless, consumed by thoughts he couldn't shake. I didn't talk about it with anyone, I didn't vent, I didn't question it directly. He just watched. I analyzed every move, every excuse, every response that seemed rehearsed. And, in the silence of his own reflections, he began to prepare for what might come. Sophie, on the other hand, showed no signs of uneasiness. On the contrary, it seemed lighter, more radiant. As if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. She still kissed him when leaving the house, still told him she loved him before going to sleep. But there was something mechanical about these gestures, as if they were acts performed out of obligation, not out of will. James began to notice that she spent more time getting ready before going out, choosing clothes that she wouldn't normally wear for a simple day at work. He began to notice that there were new pieces in the wardrobe that he had never seen before. Different perfumes, a subtle change in makeup. They were small things, but together they formed a disturbing picture. He wanted to confront her. He wanted to ask directly, he wanted to end that suffocating doubt that consumed him. But he couldn't. Because if you asked, you would have to deal with the answer. And he didn't know if he was ready for that. He still clung to the possibility that he was wrong, that it was just a phase, that it was all just his mind playing tricks. But deep down, I knew the truth was different. And it was only a matter of time before it came to light. And then that day came. The day Sophie announced that she would have an important meeting in the evening, a meeting with her boss and some colleagues to discuss a new project. James nodded, forcing a smile, as he always did. But this time, he couldn't hide his discomfort. Something inside him screamed that this wasn't just a meeting. That this would be the definitive moment. He watched as she got ready, put on a dress she rarely wore, put on perfume with more care than usual. She looked beautiful. Beautiful in a way that made his chest tighten. And when she walked out the door, he stood there, watching, trying to ignore the feeling that something was about to fall apart. Night fell, and the house seemed emptier than ever. James tried to occupy his mind, tried to watch TV, tried to distract himself with anything. But nothing worked. Every minute that passed felt like a blow to his sanity. Until he picked up his cell phone. His hands hovered over the screen, his heart racing. He wasn't sure what he was about to do, but he knew he couldn't bear the uncertainty any longer. He took a deep breath. And then he typed the words that would change everything. And in that moment, without knowing it, he had started something that could not be undone. James stood in the middle of the room, the phone still in his hands, his fingers locked on the screen. He felt his breathing irregular, his thoughts running too fast, his heart hammering in his chest as if it were about to explode. The message sent was a point of no return. He knew that. There was no more room for doubts, for excuses, for trying to rationalize what I had been feeling in the last few months. Something inside him told him that this time he wasn't imagining things. He tried to take a deep breath, but the air felt heavy, dense, as if every second that passed only dragged with it the certainty that everything he believed to be under control was about to collapse. The silence that came after sending the message was deafening. No response. No explanation. Just the absolute vacuum of a secret exposed. He threw his cell phone on the couch and ran his hands through his hair, trying to contain the anxiety that was taking over his body. The house, which had always been a refuge, now felt empty and suffocating. The memory of Sophie smiling, preparing breakfast, choosing flowers for the living room, spread like a cruel shadow over everything around her. He looked at the clock. She should be coming back soon. Or maybe not. Could it be that, now that the truth had been thrown on the table, would she return home as if nothing had happened? He began to pace back and forth, unable to sit still, his mind replaying all the details he had tried to ignore. The new perfumes, the different clothes, the lame excuses, the sparkle in his eyes that was no longer meant for him. The cell phone vibrated. He froze, staring at the screen as if he were about to face a verdict. But it wasn't Sophie. It was a friend, asking something trivial, something completely irrelevant to what was happening. He ignored the message and continued waiting. The minutes passed like hours. The phone's silence became the worst confirmation he could receive. Sophie knew that he knew. And yet, he didn't try to explain himself. He didn't try to justify himself. What did this mean? He felt his stomach turn, his throat dry, his muscles tense. The truth was there, hanging over him, suffocating, and he needed to do something. I couldn't just stand there, waiting for the lie to fall apart on its own. He put on his coat, grabbed his car keys and left. The night was cold, the freezing air hitting his face as he drove without a clear destination. But he knew where he needed to go. I knew where Sophie was. The idea of catching her in the act was something that caused him a mixture of repulsion and need. He needed to see. I needed to be sure. He could no longer stand living in uncertainty, he could no longer pretend that things were normal when reality screamed otherwise. The streets passed before his eyes like blurs, the headlights reflecting on the car's glass like small flashes of a truth that he already felt on his skin. When he parked, he remained motionless for a few moments, observing the house in front of him. The lights were on, and through the window he could see shadows moving. His heart beat hard, racing, and he needed a moment to gather his courage. That was the moment when everything would change. In which doubt would transform into something tangible, real. He got out of the car, his steps heavy on the asphalt, each movement carried with a weight he had never felt before. As he approached the door, he heard muffled voices, low laughter. His vision blurred for a moment. The chest rose and fell suddenly. What would he do? Would you ring the doorbell? Would you break down the door? Would you stay there, listening to your own life fall apart on the outside? He took a step back, and before he could decide his next move, the door opened. And there she was. Sophie. Beautiful, impeccable, her hair slightly messy as if someone had run their fingers through it. The tight dress, the lips still dyed a soft red. And then, behind her, a man. The boss. Tall, confident, the look of someone who was never afraid of the consequences. James felt his stomach drop. Sophie froze when she saw him, her eyes wide, her mouth half open, not knowing what to say. The man next to her just watched, as if assessing the situation, trying to measure the damage. James didn't need to hear anything. I didn't need explanations. What he saw was enough. The silence that followed was piercing. Sophie put a hand to her chest, as if she needed to hold on to something. He tried to speak, but his voice failed. The man beside her kept his expression firm, almost defiant. James felt a bitter taste in his mouth, nausea rising in his throat. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the fact that she didn't seem surprised. She didn't seem embarrassed. As if, deep down, he knew this moment would come. As if he had already prepared himself for this moment. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. Because deep down, he knew that anything he said wouldn't change what was already done. Sophie finally found her voice, a faint, barely audible whisper. James. But he raised a hand, shushing her. I didn't want to hear it. Not at that moment. He just looked at her, then at the man beside him, and then took a step back. He turned around. He walked back to the car, his legs heavy, his chest burning. He didn't want to fight. I didn't want to argue. He just wanted to get out of there. I wanted to leave that scene behind, that image that I would never be able to erase from my memory. But as he walked away, something inside him told him that this wasn't the worst yet. That betrayal was just the beginning. That there was something more. Something he didn't know yet. And he was right. James didn't sleep that night. After leaving the house, he drove aimlessly for hours, his fingers gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. His chest felt heavy, his head throbbed, the betrayal stamped in every memory that repeated itself like an endless nightmare. Every detail that had previously seemed insignificant now fell into cruel place. Sophie had been cheating for months. Maybe more. He wanted to feel surprised, wanted to believe this was an anomaly, a passing error, but the truth was a sharp blade cutting into his skin. She didn't try to deny it. He didn't beg for forgiveness. He didn't run after him. Her silence hurt more than any words could. He parked the car in front of the house, but didn't go inside. He stood there, looking at the door, trying to gather the strength to cross it, to return to the home that now seemed like a tomb. The air was heavy, each heartbeat echoing like a muffled drum. He wanted to understand, he wanted to know why. What made Sophie do this? What did he fail to do? But deep down, I knew that some answers only bring more pain. The clock on the car's dashboard read almost 5 in the morning when he finally gave in to his tiredness and got in. The house was in darkness, and every room seemed full of memories he wanted to erase. In the kitchen, he found a note scribbled on a piece of paper. The heart gave an involuntary leap. Sophie had returned. But as he picked up the paper, he felt a shiver run up his spine. The message was short, hesitant, as if it had been written in the midst of a whirlwind of thoughts. We need to talk. I'm in a hotel. I'm waiting for you. Please go. He stared at those words, feeling a lump tighten in his throat. He could ignore it. He could pretend that Sophie no longer existed for him. But I needed that conversation. Not because I was waiting for some excuse that would make everything okay, but because I needed to see in her eyes the truth that I had been avoiding. He took a quick shower, changed his clothes and left. The hotel was not far away. During the journey, every thought crushed him with an unbearable weight. Upon arriving, he asked for information at reception and went up to his room. The hallway seemed endless, and when he finally stopped in front of the door, he stood there, not knowing if he should enter. He took a deep breath and knocked. Seconds later, Sophie opened it. Her face was marked with exhaustion, her eyes were red, as if she had been crying all night. But James didn't feel sorry. Not after what she did. He crossed his arms, waiting for her to speak first. Sophie took a step back, as if she was dreading what would come next. Then, with a trembling voice, he began to speak. He said he knew nothing he said could justify what he did. That she understood if he never wanted to see her again. But there was something he didn't know. Something she never had the courage to tell. James remained silent, his jaw clenched, feeling anger mixed with a growing uneasiness. Sophie hesitated, ran her hands over her face, her eyes moving away from direct contact, before finally releasing the words that seemed to weigh tons. She confessed that the betrayal had not just been an isolated mistake. It wasn't an impulse, it wasn't a moment of weakness. She and the boss had been involved longer than he could imagine. And worse than that, James wasn't the first to be tricked like that. He felt the ground open beneath his feet. His mind tried to process what she was saying, but nothing seemed to make sense. Sophie, the woman he loved, the woman he trusted, was admitting that this was not a momentary mistake, but rather a pattern. Something that was part of her. James felt a bitter taste in his mouth. He asked, his voice full of disbelief, how she could continue to be by his side all these years knowing that she was living a lie. Sophie looked down, unable to look at him, and said she never wanted to hurt him, that she tried to fight it, but it always happened again. James laughed. A bitter, humorless laugh, full of contempt. He ran his hands through his hair, feeling the nausea rising, trying to find some logic in what he was hearing. He asked if that meant she never loved him. If only he were a convenient accessory in her life. Sophie flinched at the words, her eyes filling with tears, and shook her head. She said she loved him, yes. That he still loved. But that love, for her, was never enough. James felt his stomach drop. How could someone say something like that? He felt a wave of hatred, of repulsion, of a pain he couldn't describe. He looked at her as if he were seeing a stranger. Sophie swallowed hard, and then came the final blow. The revelation that left him breathless. The boss, The man she was with was someone who had done this before. He had a pattern. He found married women and convinced them to give themselves to him, promising that no one would ever find out. Sophie wasn't the only one. There were others. Some were colleagues' wives, others were women who, like her, felt they were just escaping the monotony. He wasn't just any lover. He was a manipulator. And she fell into his trap more than once. James felt his entire body shake. The hatred inside him wasn't just for Sophie's betrayal, but for the fact that he was just another one. A betrayed husband among so many others. He clenched his fists, his chest burning, his thoughts boiling with anger. Sophie was crying now, repeating that she regretted it, that she never wanted him to find out like this, but that she knew that one day it would happen. James couldn't hear anymore. I couldn't look at her anymore. He turned around, feeling the bitter taste of disappointment in his mouth, and left the room without looking back. As he walked down the hotel hallway, his mind spiraled. What would you do now? How would you deal with that? He always knew that betrayal was a brutal blow, but he never imagined that the worst part would not be the pain of the betrayal itself, but the revelation that he was never special. He was just another name on a list. Anger grew, mixing with the need to do something. He couldn't let that go. I simply couldn't accept that this man would continue destroying families, seducing wives, taking advantage of other people's vulnerabilities. James stopped at the hotel reception, his heart hammering in his chest, his mind racing with thoughts. He picked up his cell phone and, without hesitation, did the only thing that felt right at that moment. He dialed a number. Waited. And then, when he heard the voice on the other end of the line, he said something that would change everything. The war was just beginning. James left the hotel as if he was drowning in his own mind. His breathing was short, his hands were shaking, his chest was so tight that it felt like something inside him would explode at any moment. Anger boiled in his blood, but there was something darker growing along with it, a cold emptiness, a sense of disorientation that made him wonder who he was now. He was no longer Sophie's husband. He was no longer the self-assured man, confident in the love he thought he had. Now he was just a specter, a man without ground, carrying the crushing weight of truth on his shoulders. The bitter taste of betrayal was still there, eating away at everything inside him like a slow poison, but now he knew there was something even worse than being betrayed. He wasn't just fooled. It was played within a dirty game that he never wanted to participate in, a plot where he was not the protagonist, just another disposable piece on a manipulator's board. He clutched his cell phone between his fingers as he walked towards the car, his mind spinning between options that ranged from the most rational to the most destructive. He could expose everything, he could destroy Sophie's boss's reputation, tell the other women, make sure no one ever trusts him again. But would that bring you any relief? What would come next? He wanted revenge, he wanted justice, he wanted that man to pay for what he did. But what about Sophie? Was she just a victim or was she just as guilty? She knew what she was doing. He chose to betray, he chose to hide, he chose to remain in this cycle even when he could have stopped. Did that make her an accomplice or just a weak woman who couldn't break out of an unhealthy cycle? James got into the car, threw his cell phone on the passenger seat and stared at the steering wheel for long seconds. The reflection in the mirror showed a man he barely recognized. Red eyes, deep dark circles, the face marked by something that had never been there before. The disillusionment. He started the engine but didn't drive. He just stood there, trying to decide what to do. Anger pulsed along with his heart, but mixed with it was a deep tiredness, an exhaustion that went beyond the physical. It was the emotional fatigue of someone who realizes they have spent years living in an illusion. Nothing he built with Sophie was real. Everything was a farce. Or maybe not. Was there a time when she really loved him? Or was he always just a safe haven while she sought excitement in other arms? The cell phone vibrated, breaking him out of his trance. He looked at the screen, hoping it was Sophie, but it wasn't. It was an unknown number. The impulse was to ignore it, but something inside him told him to answer it. The voice on the other end was that of a woman. His tone was hesitant, filled with uncertainty. She asked if he was James. He confirmed, his breath catching in his throat. What he heard next made his blood run cold. The woman said she was the wife of one of the men Sophie had been involved with. Not the boss. Other. Someone who came before him. She found out months ago, but never had the courage to tell her. Now, with everything coming to light, he decided he needed to know. James closed his eyes, his stomach dropping. So it wasn't just a case, it wasn't just a mistake, it wasn't just a thoughtless decision. It was a pattern. A cycle. Sophie hadn't just given in to a forbidden desire. She had repeated that more than once. Maybe countless times. He tried to process the information while the woman on the other end said she found out everything through old messages she found by chance. That she, like him, had lived in a lie without realizing it. But unlike Sophie, the man she got involved with wasn't a serial predator. He was just one more. Just like James. He hung up without answering. His entire body was stiff, as if he had been hit too hard to recover. The truth revealed itself in layers, each one more cruel than the last. Sophie didn't just cheat on him. She lived a double life for years. And he never suspected. Never. He spent so long believing that the trust between them was unshakable that he never imagined that she could be leading another life alongside his. He felt a bitter laugh escape his throat. Funny how comfortable voluntary blindness can be. How a man can ignore obvious signs just because he wants to believe he would never be fooled. He was naive. Ridiculously naive. The anger returned with a vengeance, but now it was mixed with something new. Determination. He wasn't going to allow all of this to go unpunished. He was no longer the same man who entered that hotel hours before. He was no longer confused, no longer trying to understand. Now he knew. And knowing changed everything. He wasn't going to scream, he wasn't going to break anything, he wasn't going to give in to his lack of control. He was going to do what needed to be done. But in the right way. He took a deep breath, picked up his cell phone and made another call. This time, to a lawyer. The meeting took place the following day. The lawyer listened to everything in silence, taking notes, without expressing any surprise. I had seen that many times before. When James finished, the man just nodded and started talking about the divorce. About how he could ensure he walked away with most of what was his. About the rights he still had. But James didn't just want that. He wanted the truth to come out. I wanted Sophie and that man to suffer the consequences of what they did. The lawyer smirked, leaning slightly forward, and said he could help him with that. The meeting ended with a plan. James left the office feeling for the first time that he had some control over the situation. He was still devastated, he was still broken inside, but now there was something new about him. A purpose. He spent years being the good man, the perfect husband, the loyal partner. Now it was time to act. He wasn't just going to let this go. He was going to make sure Sophie understood exactly what she lost. And that man would never again be able to manipulate another woman in the same way. When he returned home, he found Sophie sitting in the living room, her hands clasped, her eyes full of guilt. He stood at the door, crossing his arms, watching her without saying anything. She looked up at him, and in that instant he realized something. She was scared. Not afraid of him, but afraid of what would come next. Because now, for the first time, she didn't know what to expect. She always thought she could control the narrative, that she could manipulate the consequences. But this time, she no longer had control over anything. James took a step forward, his voice cold, calculated, with no trace of the man he used to be. And then he spoke. Not with anger, not with tears, not with resentment. but with the certainty of someone who finally understood who was in front of them. And when he finished, Sophie was completely silent. Because she knew that this time there was no going back. James watched Sophie with an expressionless, cold, distant look. The silence between them was dense, filled with everything that no longer needed to be said. He saw the fear in her eyes, not the fear of being attacked, not the fear of being abandoned, but the fear of what would happen now that she no longer had control over the situation. For years, she had manipulated circumstances to her advantage, kept up the charade, balanced the secrets, but now, sitting in front of him, there was no more room for subtle moves, for convincing excuses, or for the illusion that she could fix what she destroyed. He realized that Sophie had always trusted in his kindness, in his patience, in the idea that, in the end, he would forgive her. But she didn't know the man who stood before her now. Because this man, the one who remained after all this revelation, was no longer the same. He walked over to the couch and sat down across from her, crossing his fingers over his knee. I was in no rush, I had nothing left to lose. Sophie looked away, clasping her hands in her lap, as if trying to muster up the courage to speak, but James didn't want to hear any excuses. I didn't want any more empty justifications. He wanted her to understand. Let it feel. Sophie took a deep breath, as if trying to organize her thoughts. His eyes were red, his face still marked by the anguish of the last conversation. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, hesitant. You must hate me. James leaned forward slightly, his voice devoid of any emotion. Hate takes energy, Sophie. And I've already wasted too much trying to understand you. It's not hate I feel. It's indifference. And I think that's even worse, isn't it? She blinked in surprise, as if she hadn't been prepared for that answer. I expected screams, anger, resentment. But the lack of emotion in his eyes was worse than any outburst of fury. She ran a hand through her hair, her gaze fixed on her own hands. I don't know how to fix this. James let out a short, bitter laugh. The thing is, Sophie, there's no fixing it. You can't take back what you did. You can't erase anything. And I don't want to fix anything anymore. I just want to move on. Without you. She looked up at him, and James knew that, in that moment, she understood. For the first time, Sophie truly understood that she had lost. There was no second chance, no way to rebuild what was destroyed. Her expression changed, the mask fell, and all that was left was a broken woman, aware of the extent of her own ruin. James stood up, feeling lighter than he had in months. She walked to the table, picked up an envelope and placed it on the sofa next to her. The divorce papers are ready. My lawyer will contact you to discuss the details. I've already made my decisions. Now it's your turn. Sophie looked at the envelope as if it were a radioactive object. His fingers hesitated before picking it up, and when he finally held it, his breath hitched. You don't even want to think about it. Or talk about it. James took a step back, a humorless half-smile on his lips. I thought a lot. I thought all night. And I came to the conclusion that I don't want to spend another second of my life next to someone who did what you did. You don't deserve my time, Sophie. Nor my compassion. She lowered her head, biting her lip, holding back the tears that threatened to fall. James didn't wait for another scene, he didn't want to see tears of regret that, deep down, didn't change anything. He turned and walked to the door, but before leaving, he paused one last time. Oh, and just so you know. I told his wife everything. And the other women too. The truth is coming out, Sophie. And there's nothing more you can do to stop it. When he left and closed the door behind him, she felt something she hadn't expected, relief. For the first time in months, he felt like he could breathe without the suffocating weight of doubt, without the anguish of trying to save something that was doomed from the start. He walked down the stairs without looking back, without giving Sophie the chance to try and catch him. As he left the building, he looked up at the cloudy sky, took a deep breath, and for the first time felt like a new beginning was possible. He didn't know exactly where he was going from here, but he knew that wherever he went, it would be a place where lies wouldn't follow him. The phone vibrated in his pocket. He looked at the screen. An unknown number. He hesitated for a moment before answering. The voice on the other end was soft, feminine, and carried something he hadn't heard in a long time: sincerity. "Hi, James. I'm his wife. We need to talk." And in that moment, he knew. The story wasn't over yet. James heard the voice on the other end of the line, and for a moment, he felt a shiver run down his spine. He already knew who it was. Sophie's boss's wife. The woman betrayed, just like him. Her voice was firm, but carried a tone of exhaustion, as if each word were a burden too heavy to carry. She wanted to talk, she needed to understand, she needed to hear from him that she wasn't alone in this storm. James closed his eyes for a moment, took a deep breath and replied that yes, they should talk. He arranged a meeting in a discreet cafe, a neutral place where they could talk without fear of curious looks. When he arrived, she was already there. An elegant woman, with a sharp look, but visibly worn out. She looked up as he approached, and for the first time, James saw the exact reflection of what she felt. Anger, sadness, disappointment, but most of all, an insatiable desire for justice. She didn't waste time on formalities. He said he found out everything after he sent the message to Sophie. She said she confronted her husband and, with no way out, he confessed. But he didn't ask for forgiveness, he didn't beg for a second chance. He just accepted the exposure, as if he were tired of keeping up the charade. Their marriage had been dead for a long time, and she knew it. But hearing the confession was a brutal blow. So he decided to act. And I wanted to know if James was willing to be a part of this. He listened intently as she explained what she intended. She didn't just want a clean, discreet divorce. No. She wanted to expose everything. He wanted everyone to know who he was, what he did to so many families, how he manipulated and destroyed homes without the slightest remorse. She had evidence, messages, recordings. James felt a wave of satisfaction well up inside him. Not because he wanted blind revenge, but because he knew that man couldn't get away with it. He agreed. The following days were a whirlwind. The scandal exploded like a bomb in the company, affecting everyone involved. Sophie's boss was fired immediately, her reputation destroyed, contracts scrapped, investors backing out. The company, concerned about its image, announced an internal investigation to minimize the damage. But it was already too late. The story spread too quickly to be contained. Other women began to appear, similar stories came to light, revealing a pattern of behavior that could now no longer be denied. Sophie was caught in the middle of this fire with no way out. Her name was involved, her choices now had consequences she could no longer control. She tried to walk away, tried to maintain her dignity, but everything around her was falling apart. Betrayal was no longer a secret kept behind closed walls. It was public. It was talked about in the hallways, in message groups, at dinners with friends. The looks changed. Friendships disappeared. Even her family began to question her. She lost her job, lost the respect of her colleagues, lost the trust of everyone who once believed in her. And most of all, he lost James. She tried to contact him a few times, but he didn't respond. There was nothing more to say. Her past was now a ruin and she would have to learn to live with it. The boss, in turn, tried to minimize the damage. He denied some accusations, tried to defend himself, but the evidence was overwhelming. His wife filed for divorce and took everything she could get. He was kicked out of the company he helped build, lost valuable contracts, and before long became a pariah. No one wanted to associate your name with his. It was as if everything he had built collapsed at once. James heard that he tried to start over elsewhere, but the weight of the scandal followed him. And the worst punishment for someone like him was precisely this, being irrelevant. To be despised. James, on the other hand, found something he didn't expect. Freedom. For the first time in years, he felt light, without the weight of a suffocating lie, without the illusion of a marriage that had long gone. He sold the house, moved to another place, far from the ghosts that haunted that home. Their divorce was quick and straightforward, with no emotional negotiations, no attempts at reconciliation. He moved on. And in the process, he became closer to the only person who truly understood what he went through. The woman who, like him, was betrayed, deceived and destroyed by someone she trusted. They started as allies, then as friends. And, over time, that turned into something more. A genuine feeling, built on honesty, on shared pain, on the desire to start over without having to hide anything. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew that this time, he wouldn't be a naive man. He learned that trust cannot be given blindly, that some people are predators in disguise, that true love cannot survive when there are lies. But most of all, you learn that, no matter how bad betrayal is, it doesn't define who you are. What defines you are the choices you make after discovering the truth. And so the story ends. But now I want to hear from you. What did you think of this story? How would you have reacted in James's place? Leave your comment, I want to know your opinion. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more impactful stories like this. Here, we don't support cheating, and every story we tell shows the real consequences of bad choices. Until next time.